The paper should have been ash. Instead, Evelyn Marr pulled it from a false compartment beneath the soap mold, dry, folded, and sealed inside a waxed linen sleeve that had kept out 12 years of smoke and damp. She stared at the county stamp while Clover stood beside her in the abandoned factory. The skunk had led her through a broken service door, past the cold lye vats, and into a storage room Hawthorne Crossing claimed the fire had destroyed. 32 mortgage releases had vanished that night. Her husband, Thomas, a druggist who volunteered to carry the records from the damaged courthouse, was blamed when they disappeared. Hawthorne Trust and Loan foreclosed on 32 families, and Thomas spent the rest of his life remembered as the man who had stolen the papers or burned them to hide his theft. He died without clearing his name. Now one of those releases rested in Evelyn's hands. It proved the Bellwether family had paid its loan 6 weeks before the bank seized their 140-acre homestead. Clover scratched at the wooden base again. His coat had faded with age, and one hind leg moved stiffly across the dusty floor. But he had followed Thomas to the factory often enough to remember the scent inside the compartment. Lavender and camphor, the salve Thomas had rubbed into his fur during winter. Outside, Sheriff Amos Heller ordered Evelyn to leave the condemned building. Harlan Whitlock appeared in the doorway. The banker did not raise his voice. He looked at the release and said, "Old papers rarely return without bringing old shame with them." Clover lifted his head toward the wall. Behind the first mold stood 31 more, untouched beneath a blanket of dust. Evelyn turned the nearest one over. Carved into its base was the same narrow mark she had seen beneath the first, a mark matching the transfer notation beside Thomas's name in the county register. 9 days before the auction, Evelyn Marr woke to the rain barrel chain, tapping against the porch post. There was no rain. Hawthorne Crossing had gone nearly 6 weeks without it, and the barrel held only a shallow crescent of water. The chain moved because Clover had pushed beneath it, searching for shade. When Evelyn opened the door, the old skunk lay on his belly with one hind leg stretched stiffly behind him. "Not today," she told him. Clover raised his narrow face but did not move. Evelyn carried him inside, feeling how little weight remained beneath his faded coat. He had once been quick enough to steal eggs from Thomas's delivery basket and vanish beneath the pharmacy shelves. Age had slowed him, cold weather stiffened his right leg, and the dry season left him breathing harder after short walks. Still, he objected to being lifted until she set him beside the stove. The stove was cold. She had sold the last split wood 2 days earlier. On the kitchen table lay the notice from Hawthorne Trust and Loan. It gave her 9 days to pay $186 in arrears, plus $12 in auction fees. If she failed, the house, herb garden, and remaining pharmacy cabinets would be sold together on the house steps. Evelyn had counted her money 3 times, $31.40. She folded the notice before Clover could step on it, though there was no reason to protect it. Harlan Whitlock had already sent 2 copies. By 8 o'clock, she was at the old pharmacy, sorting what remained into boxes. The front room no longer smelled of peppermint, alcohol, and dried roots. Dust had won most of the shelves. Only a few brown bottles remained, along with Thomas's brass scale, a cracked mortar, and 6 drawers of remedies no one trusted enough to buy from his widow. A woman from the boarding house purchased liniment for 15 cents and avoided looking at the faded county notice across the street. Thomas Marr's name had remained there for 12 years, beneath the words, "misconduct during emergency transfer." The paper had been replaced twice, but the accusation had never changed. Evelyn had stopped reading it years ago. At mid-morning, Harlan Whitlock entered without knocking. He removed his hat and waited until Evelyn finished tying a box. He was 58, silver-haired, and always dressed as though a photographer might arrive. His bank had paid for the town pump, the clinic roof, and winter coal for poor families. When Thomas died, Whitlock had quietly covered $12 of the burial cost. Hawthorne Crossing remembered such things. "I hoped you might reconsider my offer," he said. "The house is not for sale to you. It is already scheduled for sale to someone." His tone remained gentle. "I am offering you control over how you leave it." Whitlock proposed $70 for the cabinets and another $40 if Evelyn vacated before the auction. He called it consideration. Evelyn heard what he did not say. The bank expected no one else to bid. She told him the cabinets had belonged to Thomas's father. "Old things acquire weight," Whitlock replied. "Sometimes more than they are worth." Clover emerged from beneath the counter. Whitlock paused. Clover sniffed his polished boot, then turned away and began pawing at the bottom drawer of Thomas's workbench. Evelyn pulled him back. He does that when the weather changes. The weather has not changed. Whitlock glanced toward the drawer. The look lasted less than a second, but Evelyn noticed it. He left his offer on the counter and reminded her that auction notices would be posted throughout the county by sunset. After he was gone, Evelyn opened the drawer Clover had scratched. It contained old corks, a broken measuring spoon, and 3 squares of linen stiffened with wax. She nearly threw them away. Then she caught a faint smell beneath the dust. Lavender and camphor. Thomas had mixed that salve for stiff joints, saddle sores, and winter-swollen hands. He had also rubbed it into Clover's hind leg when the animal was young. The recipe had disappeared after Thomas's death, along with several bottles Evelyn assumed had been sold to cover his debts. Clover pressed his nose to the linen and sneezed. Evelyn searched the remaining drawers but found only an empty bottle bearing Thomas's initials. Pale residue had hardened beneath the glass. She wrapped the bottle in linen in a cloth and placed them in her apron pocket, unsure why she was saving either. That afternoon, she walked to the courthouse to request another week before the auction. Sheriff Amos Heller stood near the steps, speaking with the county clerk. He greeted Evelyn politely but moved between her and the door when she explained why she had come. "The bank filed correctly," he said. "There is nothing the clerk can change. I am not asking him to change the debt." "Then what are you asking?" Evelyn had no answer that would sound sensible. More time. A mistake. Some proof that the last 12 years had not narrowed toward this result. Across the square, 2 boys had found Clover following her trail. They tossed dry seed pods near him and laughed when he turned slowly. Evelyn called him, ashamed of how quickly anger rose in her throat. Clover ignored the boys. His nose was lifted toward the western end of town. Then he began to walk. He passed the blacksmith, the empty freight yard, and the dry wash beyond the tannery. Evelyn followed because his weak leg should not have carried him that far. Twice, he stopped to breathe. Twice she reached to lift him, and twice he pulled away. The Mercy soap and lye works stood beyond a warped fence. Its brick chimney split near the top. County warning boards covered the gate. No one had worked there since the fire. Clover moved along the north wall until he reached a rusted ventilation grate. He pressed his nose against it and scratched once at the dirt. When Evelyn bent to pull him back, she smelled lavender and camphor on his fur. Evelyn kept one hand beneath Clover's chest while she examined the grate. 2 iron bars had rusted loose from the brickwork, leaving a gap no wider than a flour sack. The earth below it had been disturbed recently. Small tracks crossed the dust, disappeared beneath the metal, and returned the same way. Clover pushed against her palm. "You have done enough walking." He answered by twisting free and forcing his head through the opening. His shoulders followed. For a moment, his stiff hind leg caught against the lower bar, and Evelyn thought he would injure himself. Then he pulled it through and vanished into the dark. She heard him moving beyond the wall, slow claws ticking over brick. The warning boards on the fence named lye residue, unstable flooring, and county seizure. Trespass carried a $5 fine. Interfering with sealed property could bring 30 days in jail. Evelyn read each line twice, partly because she wanted the words to stop her. Clover scratched from inside. She followed the wall until she found the service door described in the old fire report. The upper hinge had sagged, and a strip of charred wood showed where someone had pried at it before. She worked Thomas's broken mortar handle into the gap. The door resisted, then opened with a sound like a board being torn from a coffin. The air inside was cooler than the afternoon, heavy with old fat, ash, and something mineral that dried her tongue. Sunlight entered through holes in the roof and settled in pale columns across the floor. The vats stood empty beneath a skin of dust. Rust had spread down their sides like dark rain. Clover. A faint scrape answered from beyond the molding room. Evelyn wrapped her handkerchief over her mouth and stepped carefully. Burned beams had fallen across the main passage. She remembered the building before the fire, when wagons lined the yard and women carried boxes of yellow soap through the side entrance. Thomas had come there often to deliver salves for cracked hands and burns. Evelyn had never asked why he sometimes returned after dark. The thought made her slow. Clover appeared between 2 overturned crates. His breathing had quickened, but he kept moving. He led her past a row of shallow shelves into a storage room where wooden molds stood stacked against the wall. Most were blackened at the edges. Several had split apart from heat and age. Clover stopped beside one that looked no different from the others. He pressed his nose to the base, pawed once, and sat back. Evelyn lifted the mold onto a work table. It was heavier than it should have been. A narrow line of pale wax filled the seam along its bottom, protected from soot by the way the mold had rested against the wall. She found a rusted scraper nearby and worked it into the seam. The wax broke in small white flakes. Beneath it, a thin wooden panel shifted. The compartment inside held a packet wrapped in waxed linen. A trace of lavender and camphor rose from the waxed linen, but no chemical odor came with it. Inside was a county mortgage release for Samuel and Ruth Bellwether. It recorded payment in full to Hawthorne Trust and Loan on April 3, 12 years earlier, and released the bank's claim to their 140-acre homestead north of Bitter Creek. The Bellwethers had been driven from the land the following year. The document showed that the bank had possessed no legal claim when it took their home. Clover scratched the base of the mold again, then turned toward the wall. 31 other molds stood beneath a canvas sheet turned gray with dust. Evelyn lifted one corner and saw a narrow carved mark on the nearest wooden base. A boot struck broken glass in the passage. Sheriff Amos Heller entered with one hand near his holster and the other holding a cloth over his mouth. He looked first at Evelyn, then at the open mold. "I told you the place was condemned. You told me the clerk could not change my debt. That was not permission to break a county seal." Evelyn held out the paper. Heller did not take it. "What is it?" "A release belonging to Samuel Bellwether." His expression changed so slightly she might have imagined it. "That name has been closed for years. The loan was paid." "Put the document down. It was hidden here." That makes it evidence of trespass before it makes it evidence of anything else." Heller wrapped the packet in its linen without reading beyond the heading. He said he would log it at the sheriff's office and notify the county clerk. Evelyn refused to release it until he promised to give her a signed receipt. That argument lasted long enough for Clover to lie beside the table, his chest moving too quickly. Heller saw the animal and lowered his voice. "Get him outside before the dust finishes what age started." Evelyn hated him for being right. She carried Clover into the yard while Heller locked the service door with a chain from his saddlebag. He gave her a receipt naming one folded document of uncertain origin. He did not include the Bellwether name. By the time Evelyn reached the square, Clover could no longer walk without dragging both hindquarters. She placed him in the shade beside the courthouse pump and wet his mouth with 2 capfuls of water. A newspaper page had caught beneath the bench. The headline concerned banking seizures in Three Rivers County. A territorial examiner named Nathan Cole had requested records after 5 farms changed hands through the same holding company. Evelyn tore out the column and folded it into her pocket. She could not yet say why. Inside the courthouse, the county clerk refused to let her examine the Bellwether file without written permission from Sheriff Heller. Evelyn asked to see the public mortgage index instead. That request could not legally be denied. The index showed the Bellwether loan as unpaid at foreclosure. Beside the entry, someone had written that the original release had been destroyed in the Mercy Soap fire. The signature beneath the notation belonged to Miriam Voss. Miriam had once served as the county's notary clerk. She now kept accounts for a dressmaker on Alder Street and attended church every Sunday from the last pew. Evelyn found her trimming thread from a blue morning sleeve. Miriam's scissors stopped when she heard Samuel Bellwether's name. "I copied what the bank submitted," she said. "You certified that the release burned. I certified a list placed before me. Did you see the burned papers?" Miriam resumed cutting, but the blades closed on empty air. No one saw much after that fire. Evelyn placed the sheriff's receipt on the table. Miriam read the vague description, then looked toward the shop window, as though expecting someone to be watching. "If a release survived," Evelyn said, "the county record is false, or the paper you found is false. Thomas's name is beside the transfer entry." Miriam's face tightened. "You should leave old signatures alone." "Why?" "Because ink cannot defend the hand that made it." The dressmaker called from the back room. Miriam pushed the receipt toward Evelyn and slipped a scrap of paper beneath it. The scrap bore a file number and 2 words, "Not here." Evelyn returned to the pump after sunset. Clover had recovered enough to stand, though his weak leg trembled. Sheriff Heller crossed the square carrying the Bellwether packet toward Hawthorne Trust and Loan instead of the courthouse evidence room. He entered through the bank's side door. A lamp came on in Harlan Whitlock's private office. Evelyn waited until Heller left. Then she looked down at the file number Miriam had given her. It did not match the Bellwether loan. It belonged to Mercy Soap and Lye Works. The Mercy Soap file concerned a property tax dispute opened 2 weeks before the fire, and closed the morning after it. Mercy Soap and Lye Works had paid its taxes for the year. Yet the index showed an emergency lien placed on the factory for unpaid fees, followed by a county seizure order signed at 8 to 10 the morning after the blaze. Evelyn returned to the courthouse before the clerk opened his shutters. Clover remained at home beside the cold stove, wrapped in an old wool vest. He had eaten half an egg but refused to put weight on his weak leg. Leaving him felt like a betrayal. Taking him back into town would have been worse. The county clerk, Edwin Price, watched her approach the counter with the expression of a man who had already decided how much trouble she represented. "I need the Mercy Soap tax file. You need written authorization. It is a public property record. The building is under seizure. The file number was entered 12 years ago." Price looked down at the scrap in Evelyn's hand. "Where did you get that?" She folded it before he could read Miriam's handwriting. "From the public index." "No, you did not." He left the counter and returned with Sheriff Heller. Heller placed both hands on the counter. "The paper from the factory is being reviewed. By Harlan Whitlock? By the institution named on it. That institution benefited from the foreclosure. The bank has the account books necessary to verify it." Evelyn asked whether the sheriff had logged the document in the evidence room. Heller said the receipt he had given her was sufficient. He did not answer the question. She turned to Price. "Bring me the public index for county seizures." The clerk hesitated, but Heller gave a small nod. Refusing an index in front of witnesses would make the obstruction too plain. Price carried out a ledger bound in cracked red leather and remained close enough to watch every line she read. The entry for Mercy Soap named 3 reasons for seizure: unpaid sanitation assessment, hazardous storage, and destruction of county property. The last phrase had been added in darker ink. Beside it appeared Miriam Voss's notary seal. The fire began shortly after midnight, on October 14. The county seizure order was entered at 8 to 10 the same morning. The sanitation assessment had supposedly been issued on October 15, 1 day later. The order had relied on a debt that did not yet exist. Evelyn checked the handwriting against nearby entries. The letters matched Miriam's hand, especially the narrow loop in the capital M. The seal impression looked genuine. Heller saw where her finger rested. A clerk can copy a date incorrectly. 3 different dates? A frightened town makes errors, and a careful bank profits from them. Price closed the ledger so quickly the leather struck her knuckles. Heller told her to leave before he charged her with disrupting county business. Outside, Evelyn compared her notes with the newspaper clipping about Nathan Cole. 5 farms in Three Rivers County had passed through the same holding company. The article did not name it, but it described foreclosure notices filed before assessment dates. The same impossible sequence lay in her lap. Miriam saw Evelyn waiting outside the dressmaker's shop and continued walking as though she had not. Evelyn followed her into the alley. "You certified a seizure before the debt existed." Miriam stopped beside a stack of ash barrels. "Keep your voice down. The lien was based on an assessment dated the next day. I copied what was handed to me. With your seal." Miriam's fingers trembled around her account book. "You believe a seal proves who pressed it?" "It proves who answered for it." "That is not the same thing." Evelyn asked who had brought the papers. Miriam first named the sanitation board, then a courthouse messenger who had died 9 years earlier. Each answer made her look guiltier. "You wrote, 'Not here,' because you knew the file was wrong. I wrote it because this town has windows where walls ought to be." "Did Thomas ask you to alter the record?" Miriam's face hardened. "Do not make me responsible for the questions your husband refused to answer." She entered the shop and locked the side door. The accusation followed Evelyn home. Thomas had known the factory records were false. He had visited Mercy Soap after dark. His name appeared beside the transfer notation, and Miriam spoke as though he had chosen silence. Those facts no longer formed a path toward innocence. They circled a place Evelyn had avoided for 12 years. Clover was no longer beside the stove. She found him in the pharmacy, pawing at the linen squares. He had dragged himself through the connecting door and overturned their box. His injured leg trembled, but his nose moved steadily over the wax. Evelyn held one square near the empty bottle marked with Thomas's initials. Along the linen's edge ran 3 shallow cuts, evenly spaced. The mark beneath the first soap mold had been part of a pattern. After Clover settled, Evelyn returned to the factory by the dry wash. Heller's chain secured the service door, but the north grate still hung loose. She lifted the lower bar with a broom handle until a rusted bolt tore free, widening the opening enough to crawl through. The storage room seemed darker without Clover. Evelyn covered her mouth and uncovered the row of molds. The first base carried 3 shortcuts. The next bore 1. The third had 4. Each mark had been carved before the wood darkened. She copied the sequence. 3, 1, 4, 2, 2, 5. Several molds had no cuts. Others carried a small notch near the corner. She tried matching the pattern to mortgage numbers and county dates, but nothing fit. A voice behind her said, "You are reading them backward." Evelyn turned, with the rusted scraper raised. The man in the doorway was narrow-shouldered and stooped, with a gray beard stained yellow near the mouth. Ben Hollis had worked the rendering kettles at Mercy Soap until the fire. He now repaired barrels behind the freight yard. "How did you get past the chain?" "I know another door." "Did Thomas?" Ben's eyes moved toward the molds. Thomas knew too many doors. He said the cuts identified batches. The first number marked the boiling vat, the second the mold table, and the corner notch meant the soap had been held back from shipment. Thomas had once asked Ben to reserve several molds without entering them in the factory book. "For medicine?" Evelyn asked. "That is what he said." "What was inside them?" Ben rubbed a burn scar on his wrist. "Soap, when I saw them." "You are lying." "I am remembering carefully." He claimed Thomas used hollow bases to hide pharmacy compounds from creditors. Whitlock, then the factory's largest lender, discovered the arrangement shortly before the fire. According to Ben, Thomas moved the hidden goods on the night the county papers disappeared. The story explained the waxed linen, the salve, and Thomas's visits after dark. It also made him a thief of a different kind. Evelyn asked why Ben had remained silent. "Because the factory burned, Thomas was blamed, and silence kept my daughter's note from being called." By Whitlock, Ben looked toward the passage. "Some debts are collected from people who never signed them." A board creaked outside. Ben lowered his voice. "The cuts are not the list you want. They only tell you where a mold stood. If Thomas marked records, he used something else." He left through a narrow door behind the collapsed shelving before Evelyn could follow. Evelyn examined the first mold again. Along the wax seam, almost hidden by soot, 2 letters had been pressed with the end of a metal tool. T. M. The same initials appeared on the empty salve bottle at home. From the main room came the sound of Sheriff Heller testing the chain. Sheriff Heller's key scraped against the outer lock before Evelyn reached the hidden door. She pressed the mold back into place, swept the loose wax beneath the work table with her sleeve, and followed the narrow passage Ben had used. It ran behind the collapsed shelving and ended at a loading hatch half buried by tumbleweed. The wood had swollen shut. Evelyn pushed until an old iron latch tore free, then crawled into the yard as Heller entered the storage room behind her. Rather than run toward town, she crossed the dry wash and waited beneath an abandoned water tower until Heller's horse passed on the road. By then, the initials T.M. had become heavier than the mold itself. At home, Clover lifted his head from the wool vest, but did not rise. Evelyn checked the injured leg. The swelling had spread above the joint. She wrapped the leg in cool linen. Clover endured the bandage until she reached for the wax-marked cloth, then stretched his nose toward it. "Thomas marked it," she said. "That does not tell me why." Clover's eyes closed again. Evelyn spent the evening comparing the cuts she had copied with Thomas's pharmacy books. The sequence did not match medicine batches, customer accounts, or storage shelves. Shortly before midnight, she found a different possibility in an old delivery ledger. Thomas had recorded factory orders by vat, table, and position. 3 cuts, 1 cut, 4 cuts, meant vat 3, table 1, mold 4. Ben had told the truth about the marks. He had lied about what they proved. The order corresponding to the first hollow mold was not salve. It was plain laundry soap made for Hawthorne Trust and Loans boarding properties. The entry was dated 5 days before the fire. In the margin, Thomas had written "hold base" beside a symbol shaped like a split circle. Evelyn searched the next morning for Ben behind the freight yard. His barrel shed was open, though no hammer sounded inside. She found him stacking iron hoops beside a wagon. "You said Thomas hid pharmacy goods from creditors." Ben continued working. "I said that was what Whitlock believed." "No. You said Thomas used the bases for compounds." "I said he claimed medicine." Evelyn placed her copy of the delivery entry on the barrel head. "This batch belonged to the bank." Thomas wrote "hold base." "What did you put inside it?" Ben looked toward the tracks before answering. "Nothing," he said. "I built the hollows." Thomas filled them. "How many?" "More than 6. Fewer than I wanted to remember." 32? His silence was answer enough. Ben admitted Thomas had first asked for 6 altered molds. He brought linen sleeves already sealed and paid Ben $4 to keep the work out of the factory book. 2 weeks later, Thomas asked for more. By then, Ben understood the packets were papers, not medicine. Did you read them? I read one name, Caleb Ward. His land was taken the next spring. Why did you help? Because Thomas said the bank would destroy them if they stayed in the courthouse. And you believed him? I believed a man who looked more frightened every night. Evelyn asked whether Whitlock knew. Ben said the banker came to the factory 3 days before the fire and demanded a private inspection of the molds. Thomas arrived during the argument. Ben heard Whitlock accuse him of hiding property that belonged to the bank. That is when you decided Thomas was concealing goods from creditors. That is when Whitlock told me what I had seen. Ben had repeated that story after the fire, helping turn suspicion into accepted fact. When Evelyn pressed him about the remaining molds, he claimed he did not know whether Thomas had filled them all. You built the compartments. I built 24. There are 32. Then someone else finished the work. Who? Ben picked up another hoop. Ask who controlled the factory after the county seized it. After 12 hours under the sanitation board, Mercy Soap passed to Hawthorne Trust and Loan as senior creditor. Whitlock's men inventoried it before Heller posted a permanent seal. Evelyn left Ben with one final question. Why warn me now? He looked at the soot-dark roof of the factory. Because your husband died carrying all the blame, and I have spent 12 years pretending the weight stopped with him. At the county recorder's office, Evelyn changed her approach. She did not request foreclosure files. She asked for public transfer indexes covering the year after the fire. Edwin Price could refuse individual records, but not the bound summaries kept for tax collection. She began with Samuel and Ruth Bellwether. Their 140 acres had passed from Hawthorne Trust and Loan to a company called Juniper Land Holdings, 23 days after foreclosure. The price was $800, less than half the assessed value. The second name Ben had mentioned, Caleb Ward, showed the same pattern. His 96-acre farm went to Juniper 17 days after the bank claimed it. The deed listed a purchase price of $510. Evelyn copied 6 more entries before Price noticed the names. What are you looking for? Taxable ownership. You have no business with these families. The county collected fees on every transfer. That makes them public. Price glanced toward Heller's office. Evelyn kept writing. By noon, she had found 11 properties connected to names in the burned release index. Every one passed through Hawthorne Trust and Loan. Every one reached Juniper Land Holdings within 30 days. 3 deeds were signed by different company officers, but all correspondence went to the same rented box behind the railway station. Juniper paid the county taxes through the bank. Evelyn asked Price for the company registration. He said business charters were kept in the territorial annex and required a $2 search fee. She placed 2 of her remaining coins on the counter. The charter named 3 organizers, a cattle broker from 3 Rivers, a lawyer who had moved east, and Miriam Voss's late brother, Daniel. Miriam had certified the false seizure, and her brother had helped form the company receiving the land. Her warning might have been fear or misdirection. Evelyn copied the names and left before Heller returned. Clover was standing when she reached home. He had torn off the bandage and dragged the linen toward Thomas's cabinet. His breathing remained shallow, but he scratched at the lowest panel until Evelyn opened it. Behind a row of empty tincture bottles lay a rolled survey map tied with a black thread. Thomas's split circle symbol marked the outer edge. Evelyn had assumed the map showed delivery roads. Now she noticed a faint blue line crossing Red Mesa County, with measurements in another hand. The proposed Juniper Canal. The project had been rejected 12 years earlier because the county claimed the land was too fragmented and the water rights uncertain. A note in the margin stated that reconsideration would become possible if a single company controlled at least 4,000 contiguous acres. Evelyn spread her copied deeds across the table and began marking each parcel. 11 formed a broken chain along the blue line. Clover nosed the remaining linen squares. Thomas had marked 3 numbers on each one. Evelyn had mistaken them for factory locations only. When she compared the sequences with the survey grid, the first 2 numbers also matched section and tract references. The corner notch distinguished North Bank from South. The molds were not merely hiding papers. Their marks preserved a map of the families whose releases had been taken. Evelyn returned to the recorder's office before closing and worked through the remaining names in the burned document list. Price tried to remove the index, but 2 ranchers were waiting to file deeds, and he could not do it without drawing attention. By dusk, she had 32 transfers. All 32 properties had been foreclosed by Hawthorne Trust and Loan. All had been sold to Juniper Land Holdings. Together they covered 4,860 acres. When Evelyn placed them on Thomas's survey map, the parcels joined without a gap from Bitter Creek to the western reservoir site. The missing mortgage releases had not been destroyed to hide one theft. They had been removed to manufacture an entire landscape. Evelyn did not sleep after laying the 32 deeds across Thomas's survey map. The blue canal line passed through every parcel, turning scattered farms into a single corridor from Bitter Creek to the western reservoir. By dawn, the pattern had become too deliberate to dismiss and too large to accuse without proof, tying Juniper Land Holdings to Harlan Whitlock. Thomas's initials did not provide that proof. They only placed him inside the secret. Clover watched from the floor, while Evelyn searched the pharmacy cabinets. His swollen leg had cooled beneath the fresh bandage, but he remained unwilling to stand. Whenever she opened a drawer, his nose lifted. Most held nothing but dust and mouse-chewed labels. The last cabinet had a warped back panel. Clover dragged himself close and pressed his shoulder against it. Evelyn removed 2 screws with the tip of a knife and pulled the panel loose. A narrow account book fell forward, followed by 6 folded slips tied with green thread. The book belonged to Thomas. The early pages recorded ordinary pharmacy purchases: quinine, camphor, glycerin, lamp oil. Then, 8 weeks before the factory fire, the entries changed. 6 mortgage file numbers appeared beside sums ranging from $14 to $22. Each sum had been credited to Thomas's account at Hawthorne Trust and Loan. Evelyn recognized the dates. That summer, fever had kept her in bed for 17 days. Thomas told her the medicine came on extended credit from a supplier in 3 Rivers. She had believed him because she was too weak to read the invoices and too grateful to question why the bank stopped pressing them. The 6 credits totaled $104. Beneath them, Thomas had written, 48 hours only. Evelyn opened the first folded slip. It was not a receipt, but a note in Thomas's hand. HW says delay is administrative. Releases to remain unentered until Canal Committee meets. No family loses possession before return. The next slip carried a different tone. Bellwether notice posted. Whitlock says clerical mistake. He refuses return of packet. By the 4th, Thomas's writing had become crowded and uneven. 6 became 12. Miriam's seal appears on lists. She says she did not prepare. I helped open the door. I do not know how to close it without taking Evelyn down with me. Evelyn sat on the floor. For 12 years, she had defended Thomas against the town's verdict. Even in moments when doubt entered, she had imagined only 2 possibilities: that he was innocent or that despair had made him careless. The account book offered a third. Thomas had knowingly delayed 6 releases in exchange for credit while his wife lay sick. Whitlock had not chosen him at random. He had bought his silence before demanding it. Clover rested his chin on Evelyn's skirt. She moved him away more sharply than she intended. He gave no sound, only settled beside the scattered papers. Thomas had watched 6 families wait for documents he was holding. He had written that no one would lose possession, as though a promise from Whitlock could make the act harmless. When the first foreclosure came, he concealed the papers instead of walking into the courthouse and confessing. Evelyn carried the account book to the stove. One match would reduce the pages to what the county had always claimed the releases became. Thomas would remain a wronged man in her memory. The 32 families would remain names on a map. She struck the match. Clover pulled himself upright. His weak leg folded immediately, but he crossed the space between them on 3 limbs and pressed his nose against the hand, holding the flame. The match went out against the stoveplate. Evelyn stared at him. Thomas had trusted the animal with scents, routes, and rooms he had not trusted his wife to know. Clover could not tell her whether that had been love, shame, or cowardice, but the papers could. She tied them again and placed them inside her dress. Miriam opened the dressmaker's side door before Evelyn knocked a second time. One look at the green thread made the older woman step back. Where did you find those? Behind Thomas's cabinet. Miriam led her upstairs to a room used for storing winter cloth. She locked the door and lowered the blind. Evelyn showed her the 6 file numbers. Miriam read each one without asking what they meant. You knew. I knew he held them 2 days. He held them longer, because Whitlock would not give them back. You certified the lists that said they burned. Miriam sat among bolts of gray wool. I certified the first inventory. 6 missing releases. Daniel brought it to me from the bank. Your brother. He said Juniper was a temporary company for canal surveys. He put his name on the charter because Whitlock promised him a clerkship. Daniel drank through the wages and died believing he had done nothing worse than lend his signature. The 6-file inventory carried Miriam's genuine seal. 3 nights later, someone entered the notary room and took the brass press. By the time it reappeared, 2 additional inventories had been filed, one naming 18 missing releases, another naming 32. Why did you not report it? Because I had left the press unlocked. Because Daniel's name was on Juniper. Because Whitlock showed me a statement saying Thomas accepted bank credit on the same dates. Miriam looked at Evelyn. He said if I challenged the records, your husband would be charged before the fire ashes cooled. He was charged anyway, after Thomas refused to tell them where he moved the papers. Miriam opened a cedar chest and removed a cloth-bound register. Unlike the county ledger, its pages carried serial numbers for every use of her notary seal. The 6-file inventory appeared at number 418. The next genuine document was 419, dated 4 days later. The 18 and 32 file inventories carried impressions numbered 427 and 431. Those seal numbers had not yet been issued on the dates written beside them. This proves the later inventories were made afterward, Evelyn said. It proves the seal impressions were false or backdated. It does not prove who pressed them. It proves you did not. Miriam closed the register. Only if I stand beside it and say so. Will you? Fear moved across Miriam's face before she lowered it. Not in this town. Not yet. Evelyn wanted to despise her. Instead, she remembered the match dying against the stove and understood how easily fear disguised itself as delay. She asked for permission to copy the serial entries. Miriam agreed, but kept the original register. At the telegraph office, Evelyn spent 40 cents sending a message to the territorial banking examiner, named in the newspaper. She addressed it to Nathan Cole's office in Mesa City and listed the bellwether release number, the impossible seizure dates, Juniper land holdings, and 32 foreclosures, totaling 4,860 acres. The operator charged by the word, forcing her to reduce 12 years of damage to 63 words. She then mailed copies of the map, 6 deed references, and Miriam's seal sequence by registered post. The postage and search fee left her with $27.10. As the clerk stamped the receipt, the office door opened behind her. Whitlock entered carrying a parcel tied in white string. His eyes passed from Evelyn to the registered envelope, then to the name written on the ledger. Nathan Cole, he said. That is an ambitious distance for a local misunderstanding. Evelyn closed the registry book. You seem well informed about misunderstandings. Whitlock placed his parcel on the counter. Your husband also believed distance could turn suspicion into evidence. He knew about Juniper. Many people knew about a proposed canal. Not before the land was taken. Whitlock's expression remained patient. Be careful which part of Thomas you decide to rescue. The honest part may not survive the dishonest one. He left without asking what she had sent. That frightened Evelyn more than a demand would have. When she returned home, a fresh auction notice had been nailed to the pharmacy door. The original sale date had been crossed out in red ink. By order of Hawthorne Trust and Loan, the property auction would occur in 6 days, not 9. Beneath the notice, someone had written a single line in pencil. 32 molds will not matter if the building is empty. 5 days remained before the auction, when Evelyn began visiting the families whose names appeared on Thomas's map. The former Ward property lay 3 miles north of Hawthorne Crossing, though Caleb Ward no longer owned the house, barn, or woodollet trees he had planted. He lived behind the Cooper's yard in a room divided from the tool shed by canvas. Caleb listened until Evelyn mentioned the bellwether release. Then he checked the alley. My loan was paid, he said. I told the county that 12 years ago. Will you say it again before witnesses? I said it before witnesses the first time. He still had 3 receipts, showing payments to Hawthorne Trust and Loan, but the final receipt had disappeared during the foreclosure hearing. The judge ruled that partial records could not overcome the bank ledger. Caleb's wife spent their last savings appealing and died before the decision returned. He would lend Evelyn copies. He would not stand in County Hall. The second family refused even that much. Martha Wren had moved into her married son's cabin after Juniper took their 82 acres. She shut the door when Evelyn named Whitlock. My son works at the bank stable. Truth will not feed his children if they dismiss him. By noon, Evelyn had spoken with 6 families. 2 possessed receipts. 1 had a letter stating that the bank's claim was satisfied. None agreed to testify. Several had spent years teaching their children not to mention the land because anger had become another expense they could not afford. At the 7th address, an elderly rancher named Amos Pike showed Evelyn a foreclosure notice bearing a payment total larger than his original loan. He had kept it because the arithmetic angered him more than the loss. When she asked him to appear publicly, he folded the paper into quarters and said Whitlock still held his daughter's mortgage. Evelyn copied the figures and left with another piece of truth. No one was willing to speak aloud. The pattern continued through the next day. People remembered exact sums, dates, and bank clerks. They also remembered what happened to anyone who challenged Hawthorne Trust and Loan. Credit vanished. Suppliers demanded cash. Employers reduced hours. Whitlock had not needed to threaten 32 families separately. He had taught the town what resistance cost. Evelyn returned home with 4 copied receipts, 2 letters, and no public witness. Clover lay beside Thomas's map, his bandaged legs stretched away from his body. He had eaten little. Ben Hollis arrived before dawn carrying a lantern and refusing to enter until Evelyn covered the window. The molds were not Thomas's last hiding place, he said. After the fire, Ben had returned to Mercy Soap before the permanent seal went up. Thomas met him near the rendering shed and asked whether the drainage passages remained open. Beneath the factory ran a shallow wash channel and a deeper stone culvert leading from the lye room to a settling chamber beyond the north wall. Thomas carried a narrow chest, wrapped in oilcloth. You watched him hide it? I watched him go below with it. He came back without it. Ben removed a scorched iron key stamped with the number 4. It opened a service grate behind the main kettle. Why tell me now? Ben looked toward Clover. Your animal has more courage left than most of us. That ought to shame a man once. Evelyn refused to let Clover walk. His leg had not recovered, and the factory dust had already weakened his breathing. So she settled him in Thomas's old delivery crate with water and damp linen. Clover pushed his nose between the slats toward Ben's scorched key. When Ben held it closer, the skunk sniffed the metal and then turned toward the waxed linen. Thomas carried that salve whenever the cold set in, Ben said. He carried it the night he hid the chest? He carried it most nights after you took sick. At the telegraph office, a message waited from Nathan Cole's clerk in Mesa City. Registered packet received. Patterns merit review. Preserve originals. Examiner cannot act on copies without sworn testimony, direct institutional records, or evidence establishing control of Juniper Land Holdings. Cole had not dismissed her. He had also named everything she still lacked. After reading Cole's message, Evelyn returned home, wrapped Clover in Thomas's wool vest, and carried the crate to the factory. She intended to keep him near the upper landing, away from the worst dust, while she and Ben entered through the loading hatch. Heller's chain remained on the service door, and new wire had been twisted through the north grate. Behind the main kettle, Ben scraped ash from a square iron plate. The key turned after he struck the lock with a brick. Stone steps descended into damp darkness. The air smelled of mineral water, rancid grease, and old lye. Evelyn tied a wet cloth over her mouth. Ben warned her not to touch the white crust along the walls. The upper channel led 40 feet to a low chamber where broken barrels rested in black silt. A shelf stood above the old water line. On the shelf sat a wooden chest wrapped in rotted oilcloth, but it was too light. Inside lay bundles of burned cord, 6 empty linen sleeves, and a rusted brass press with its handle removed. The metal face carried Miriam Voss's notary design. The press looked useful, but its serial edge had been filed smooth. Anyone could claim Thomas stole it. The empty sleeves strengthened the accusation that he controlled the missing papers. The chamber held no ledger, no original releases, and nothing connecting Whitlock to Juniper. It was a room arranged to make Thomas look guilty. Evelyn searched the silt and stone cracks. She found only a medicine bottle bearing Thomas's initials, empty except for hardened lavender residue. Maybe this was all he hid, Ben said. He would not build 32 compartments and leave the final proof in an open chest. Fear changes what a man finishes. So does someone reaching the hiding place first. After the empty chest yielded nothing, Evelyn climbed to the upper landing and carried Clover down in the crate, covering his nose with damp linen. She held him near the oilcloth and Thomas's bottle, hoping he could distinguish one old scent from another. Lavender lingered near the empty chest, but Clover turned away from it. He stretched toward a lower drainage opening half concealed by silt. A current of colder air moved through it. Clover scratched once at the stone rim and left a dark line in the white crust. Ben lowered the lantern. Behind the buildup, iron rings had been set into a removable stone slab. The room was not the end of the passage. They had begun clearing the first ring when a bell sounded above them. The factory gate bell. Ben extinguished the lantern. Footsteps crossed the kettle room. Sheriff Heller called Evelyn's name and ordered anyone below to come out. Another voice read a county notice authorizing seizure of all contents, fixtures, substructures, and concealed property associated with Mercy Soap and Lye Works. Whitlock had expanded the bank's claim beneath the floor. Evelyn carried Clover up the steps while Ben followed with the empty chest. Heller waited beside two deputies and Edwin Price. Fresh boards, iron spikes, and chain lay near the door. Heller took the chest, the filed press, and Thomas's bottle. As Price reached for them, Heller asked how Whitlock's new petition could name a lower chamber before the sheriff had filed any report about it. Price gave no answer. Heller refused to record the opening because no search of county-seized property had been authorized, but his gaze remained on the clerk. Then he nailed the iron plate shut. Before Evelyn was escorted beyond the fence, Heller posted a new notice across the gate. Anyone entering the factory, its drains, culverts, or underground chambers, would be charged with theft from Hawthorne Trust and Loan. The bank no longer claimed only the building. It claimed whatever Thomas had hidden beneath it. 4 days remained before the auction, when Evelyn asked Caleb Ward to meet her in the abandoned pharmacy. He arrived after dark with his payment receipts, hidden inside his coat. Amos Pike came 10 minutes later, carrying the foreclosure notice whose totals exceeded his original loan. Neither man had agreed to testify. They believed Evelyn wanted more copies. Instead, she placed Thomas's account book on the counter and opened it to the 6 credits from Hawthorne Trust and Loan. "My husband delayed 6 releases," she said. "He accepted $104 while I was sick. He told himself it would last 48 hours. It lasted long enough for Whitlock to turn 6 families into 32. Caleb stared at the entries. "You brought us here to say Thomas helped him? I brought you here because Whitlock will say it first. If we hide what Thomas did, he will use the hiding to bury everything else." Amos read the note about the canal committee, then the later line in which Thomas admitted he had opened the door. "Your husband knew my land was taken." "Yes, and he waited 12 years to tell me. He died 3 years after the fire. He spent those years hiding evidence instead of confessing. I cannot make that brave." Caleb closed the book. "Then why should anyone trust what he left?" "Because your receipts match the file numbers he wrote. Because the dates on Miriam's seal were created after the county says they were used. Because every stolen farm became juniper land. Thomas's guilt does not make Whitlock innocent." The room stayed quiet except for Clover breathing beneath the stove. His injured leg was bound against a narrow splint, and he had not crossed the room all day. Caleb placed one receipt beside the account book. "You may use my name." Amos did the same with his foreclosure notice. "Only if you read the wrong total aloud." By morning, 2 witnesses had become 5. Martha Wren still refused to appear, but she allowed her late husband's satisfaction letter to be copied and signed an affidavit before a traveling livestock notary. Another family sent a daughter who remembered Edwin Price removing a page from the county file. None believed the evidence would survive County Hall. They came because Evelyn had stopped asking them to protect Thomas. Miriam arrived near noon with her cloth-bound seal register wrapped in a shawl. She saw the families gathered around the map. "I did not agree to this," she said. "You sent copies of my serial entries to a territorial examiner. I sent what you allowed me to copy." Miriam looked at Caleb and Amos. "My brother signed the Juniper Charter, and Thomas accepted the credits," Evelyn said. "We can each tell the part that belongs to us." Before Miriam could answer, a boy from the telegraph office delivered a message. Nathan Cole's clerk had confirmed that the 6 bank account numbers in Thomas's book belonged to an internal clearing series. The series did not appear in public borrower ledgers. Cole would arrive on the morning of the auction if Evelyn could produce originals and at least 2 sworn witnesses. His authority would preserve records, not suspend the sale without local cause. Whitlock had shortened the deadline, knowing outside help might come too late. Miriam read the message twice. "If I stand in that hall, Harlan will say I forged the records to protect Daniel. He will say worse if you stay away." Miriam lifted her register, ready to leave. You speak as though truth makes fear smaller. No, Evelyn said. It makes the cost of fear belong to someone besides us. After a long moment, Miriam sat beside Caleb and opened the register to seal number 418. Ben came through the rear door before sunset. He had walked the north drainage ditch and found the stone culvert's outlet beyond the factory fence. Heller's order claimed every underground passage connected to Mercy Soap, but the outlet lay in a county wash, 40 yards beyond bank property. The lower slab opens from the other side, Ben said. If the channel has not collapsed. Evelyn looked toward Clover. No, Caleb said. That animal has already spent more than he owns. Evelyn agreed. She wrapped Clover in Thomas's wool vest and left him beneath Miriam's care, while she, Ben, Caleb, and Amos entered the wash after midnight. The culvert mouth was nearly hidden by reeds and mineral crust. They crawled through cold mud until the ceiling lowered within inches of their backs. 20 yards in, fallen stone blocked the main channel. Ben found a narrow bypass cut into the wall. It ended at the removable slab Clover had marked. The iron rings would not turn. Amos worked one loose with a fence tool, but the second snapped, dropping part of the slab into the passage. The crash rolled beneath the factory like distant thunder. On the other side lay a smaller chamber. Its shelf was empty. They found wax fragments, rotted cord, and a rectangle in the silt where a chest had once rested. Someone had removed it. Evelyn felt the old temptation to make Thomas simpler. Perhaps he had taken the chest. Perhaps all they possessed were patterns that a banker could explain away. Then a muffled scratching came through the culvert. Miriam appeared at the bypass carrying Clover inside the split delivery crate. Her dress was dark with mud. He would not stop, she said. He tore the splint loose trying to reach the door. Clover's breathing carried a faint whistle. Yet when Evelyn lifted him, he turned away from the empty shelf and stretched toward the stone ceiling. A trace of lavender clung to the wall. Ben raised the lantern. 3 bricks bore pale wax around their edges. The mortar between them had never fully hardened. Caleb removed the first brick. Behind it was a tin-lined cavity holding a narrow chest wrapped in oilcloth and coated with the same salve Thomas had used on Clover's leg. The chest contained no gold, and only 7 original releases. The others likely remained in the molds. Beneath them lay a bank transfer ledger, 2 Juniper stock certificates, the missing handle from Miriam's seal press, and letters tied with black thread. One certificate named Daniel Voss. The other placed his shares under an irrevocable voting proxy granted to Harlan Whitlock. The ledger recorded payments from Juniper to 3 numbered accounts, including the internal series that had credited Thomas. Beside 32 entries appeared foreclosure dates, purchase prices, and projected canal values. At the bottom lay Thomas's statement. He named Whitlock, described the first 6 delayed releases, and admitted his own part without asking forgiveness. He wrote that the remaining papers were divided between the marked molds and the lower chamber because one hiding place could be found. When Ben refused further work, Thomas had cut the final 8 hollow bases himself. The last page of the statement was missing. A bell rang above them, the courthouse bell announcing a public filing. They emerged near dawn and found new notices along the road. Whitlock had petitioned County Hall for an immediate hearing to validate the seizure, declare all factory documents stolen bank property, and advance the auction from 4 days away to noon. The hearing would begin at 12. Evelyn carried the chest into the pharmacy. Clover lay inside the crate, too exhausted to lift his head. Miriam placed her register beside the transfer ledger. Caleb added his receipts. Amos unfolded the false foreclosure total. For the first time, Evelyn did not arrange Thomas's papers to make him look innocent. She arranged them to make the truth impossible to separate. At 11:40, they entered County Hall together. Sheriff Heller stood at the door. His gaze moved from Miriam's register to the chest, and although the seizure order remained in his hand, he did not try to take either from Evelyn. Whitlock was already waiting beside 2 clean bank ledgers and a sealed letter bearing Thomas Marr's signature. The hearing began with Harlan Whitlock asking that the chest never be opened. He stood before the county commissioners in a dark coat, one hand resting on 2 bank ledgers. Sheriff Heller occupied the aisle beside him. Edwin Price sat at the clerk's table with the auction order already prepared. Whitlock said the contents of Mercy Soap and Lye Works had been taken from a condemned building and might carry lye residue or mold. Until a sanitation officer examined them, no factory document should enter the public record. The chairman looked toward Evelyn. "Can you prove these papers are safe?" "I can prove they were hidden to survive," she said. That is not the same thing. Whitlock offered a sympathetic smile. Mrs. Marr has suffered greatly. The county need not increase that suffering by confusing grief with evidence. A deputy placed the chest near the door. The truth had reached the room, but the room would not yet allow it to speak. Whitlock's second objection was ownership. Under the seizure order, every mold, ledger, fixture, and concealed compartment belonged to Hawthorne Trust and Loan. Anything removed was stolen property. Sheriff Heller stepped toward the chest. Evelyn placed herself between them. You took the bellwether release and carried it to the bank. Did you enter it in the evidence room? Heller's jaw tightened. The chairman repeated the question. No, Heller said. I sought account verification. From the institution accused of benefiting from it? Heller did not answer. Whitlock interrupted before the silence could settle. He opened the first clean ledger and invited Edwin Price to compare it with the county foreclosure index. The balances matched. Payment totals, notices, default dates, and transfer fees appeared in careful columns. 32 loans were shown as delinquent. The county did not seize land on rumor, Whitlock said. It relied on books maintained in the ordinary course of business. Caleb Ward stood from the rear bench. Your book says I owed $94. Whitlock turned politely. And did you bring a complete account proving otherwise? Caleb placed his 3 receipts on the clerk's table. They totaled $81. The missing final receipt left a $13 gap. That is unfortunate, Whitlock said. But incomplete records do not erase a debt. Amos Pike came forward next. His foreclosure notice showed that the bank claimed more than his original principal. Whitlock explained it as accumulated interest and legal fees. The answer was smooth enough that several townspeople nodded. The clean ledgers turned each family into an isolated dispute. Evelyn asked the chairman to open the transfer ledger from the chest. Whitlock objected again, and the commissioners argued over ownership while the auction clock advanced toward noon. Miriam stood beside Evelyn with the seal register. When asked whether the later inventories were false, fear emptied her face. Whitlock spoke gently. Mrs. Voss, your late brother organized Juniper Land Holdings. No one would fault you for protecting his memory, but a frightened recollection is not stronger than your own seal. Miriam looked toward the benches. Daniel's name moved through the crowd in whispers. I need a direct answer, the chairman said. Did you certify the 32-file inventory? Miriam opened her mouth, then closed it. That hesitation gave Whitlock the room. He broke the seal on Thomas's letter. This was delivered to me 3 days before the fire, he said. It bears Mr. Marr's signature. He read aloud Thomas's admission that he had delayed 6 releases, accepted credit, and moved documents from their assigned transfer case. Whitlock stopped before the second page. The old judgment returned because it already knew the way. Whitlock laid the letter beside the county notice. Thomas Marr stole official records. His widow has now entered sealed property to recover the materials he concealed. Whatever broader story she prefers, the auction concerns a lawful debt and should proceed. Evelyn could have defended Thomas. She could have said fever, medicine, fear, or regret. Instead, she faced the benches. My husband accepted the money, she said. He delayed 6 releases. He believed Harlan Whitlock when he was told no family would lose possession. When the first family did, Thomas hid the papers rather than confess what he had done. The admission quieted the room. Thomas was not innocent, Evelyn continued, but his guilt became the lock Whitlock used on 32 doors. She placed the voting proxy before the commissioners. It transferred Daniel Voss's Juniper shares to Harlan Whitlock. Beside it, she laid Thomas's account book and the transfer ledger from the chest. The internal account numbers matched, but the dates did not. Juniper payments entered the transfer ledger 1 or 2 days before several families received default notices. Projected canal values appeared weeks before the county publicly reconsidered the water route. The Bellwether property showed a foreclosure price of $800 and a canal valuation of $3,400. Whitlock said the ledger was fabricated. Ben Hollis rose from the side wall. He admitted building 24 hollow molds at Thomas's request and described Whitlock's private inspection before the fire. He also admitted repeating the story that Thomas hid pharmacy goods. Why should this board trust you now? Whitlock asked. It should not trust me alone, Ben said. That is why I came with the men I helped silence. Caleb and Amos swore to their receipts. Martha Wren's affidavit was read. 3 other families produced letters, partial accounts, and dates that matched the hidden ledger. The dispute stopped looking isolated. Miriam still had not spoken. Whitlock pointed to Thomas's letter. The dead man confessed. Mrs. Voss certified the inventory. The sheriff recovered her seal press from Mar's hiding place. There is your chain, KD. Miriam looked at the filed edge of the brass press on Heller's table. Then she opened her register. My genuine 6-file inventory carried seal number 418, she said. Her voice shook, but it remained audible. The 18-file inventory bears 427. The 32-file inventory bears 431. Those numbers were assigned days after the documents claimed they were stamped. Whitlock said she could have backdated them herself. I could have, Miriam replied. That is why I remained silent. But the county's copy of number 419 is still attached to a livestock deed, filed 4 days after the fire. The sequence cannot exist in both places at once. Edwin Price tried to remove the register. Miriam held it against her chest. Sheriff Heller stepped between them. For the first time, he did not look to Whitlock before acting. He ordered Price to sit down and admitted that he had taken the bellwether release to the bank rather than logging it. Whitlock had told him the paper was an old duplicate and that public disclosure would cause panic. The admission did not absolve Heller, but it broke the appearance of ordinary procedure. Whitlock demanded that the chairman exclude every stolen document. When the chairman hesitated, Whitlock ordered his attorney to call the auctioneer outside. The courthouse clock struck noon. A voice from the rear doorway asked that no sale be conducted. Nathan Cole entered with a territorial clerk and 2 sealed record boxes. His office had compared Evelyn's telegraph numbers with banking reports from Three Rivers County. The internal clearing series was genuine. One of the numbered accounts belonged to a Juniper correspondent bank. Another had received deposits authorized by Harlan Whitlock. Cole could preserve the evidence and suspend financial actions tied to records under territorial examination. Whitlock argued that Cole had arrived with only copies and accusations. Then we will begin with your books, Cole said. Cole's clerk held 1 page of Whitlock's clean ledger against the window. A Mesa Paperworks watermark appeared in the fibers, a mark first issued 3 years after the fire. The binding thread also passed through holes that did not align with the original cover, and beneath the pasted label lay an older volume number scraped nearly smooth. The truth was strong enough to survive the room. The county commissioners suspended the auction and directed the recorder to reopen all 32 land claims for formal review. Cole sealed Hawthorne Trust and Loan's relevant books and accounts and opened a territorial investigation into fraudulent conveyance, falsified bank records, and obstruction. Before sunset, a circuit judge acting on the local record and Cole's filing barred Juniper Land Holdings from selling or encumbering the 4,860 acres while the claims were examined. Before the hall emptied, Evelyn asked for the rest of Thomas's letter. Whitlock had read only the first page. The second contained Thomas's demand that every release be returned and his warning that he had copied Juniper's transfers. There was no final page behind it. 3 weeks later, the county removed Thomas's misconduct notice. It replaced it with a narrower finding. Thomas Marr had unlawfully delayed 6 releases, then preserved evidence exposing the larger fraud. Evelyn did not ask for kinder words. The bellwether claim was restored first. Others would take months, perhaps years. Late justice could not rebuild barns or return the dead, but it returned the family's names to the record. On the evening the factory seal was removed, Evelyn carried Clover through the service door. The old skunk had survived, though he could no longer use the weak hind leg. Evelyn placed him on Thomas's wool vest, beside the last marked mold. Afternoon light entered through the broken roof and reached the storage room for the first time in years. Evelyn loosened the wax beneath the last mold. Inside its hollow base lay 1 remaining release and a folded page addressed in Thomas's hand. For Evelyn, Thomas had written that he did not deserve to be remembered as an innocent man. He asked only that the families be told where their papers lay, and that Evelyn understand why he had hidden the truth from her. Not because he doubted her courage, but because he lacked his own. At the bottom, in smaller writing, he had added that Clover still knew the road to every place people wanted forgotten. Evelyn rested the page against the open mold. She did not forgive Thomas by making him better than he had been. She forgave him by seeing the whole man and finishing what fear had left undone. Clover settled against her boot. Outside, families were arriving to recover the remaining releases. One by one, Evelyn opened the shutters and let the dust move into the light.